Welcome, everyone, to Creative Musings. My name is Tracy Loring. I'm a coach, an artist, and an instructor. And in this podcast, we explore ideas and premises to help you create the life that you would love and live it joyfully. Today, I have the pleasure of having Rebecca Berciunas here with me. And Rebecca is a holistic movement coach who combines movement with the healing arts. And I'm super excited to have you here, Rebecca. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
I'm
Thank
excited.
you. So I'm really intrigued about movement and the healing arts. I'd love for you to tell us about what that means to you and how you work with your clients on and what that does in their life.
Well, my approach is one that helps the client ask questions and want to know why they move the way they do or why they are hurting in the way they're hurting, and helping them to understand from a grounded beginning how their body moves. And so working together, maybe we're doing yoga, or if they've asked for something specific, I try to encourage them not to just copy the shapes that I'm doing, but to practice their body and helping them kind of feel their bodily sensations, feel their weight. I start from the feet, from the ground up. We spend a lot of time on the floor. So coming from a very grounded space and doing things in a slow manner, which is, I say it's a slow process, but it's very respectful of your body, and it's a process of creating a relationship with your body. So your soma, the body that you are born with, that is your birthright. That is your first signature, and your first, really first, our first language is the language of movement. And when we're infants, we rely on being carried around and we have to kind of surrender to that. But as we develop, we learn our signature. So finding that connection, having a relationship with the inner body and the outer body, and not just copying something, but creating your own template and working from that inner space to the outer field, and how you take up space in the world and how your energy is out in the world. So, working from the inside out.
Mm. I love that. I love that. And embodiment is something that seems to be more top of mind for folks nowadays. Starting to see more people talk about it. And I have a background in Chinese medicine. I studied Chinese medicine for many years. And the idea of this connection between mind, body, and spirit was always something that resonated with me. But it wasn't until recently I took a course on embodiment. Was a fairly extensive course, about 13 weeks, and it really helped open my eyes about really what it means to be embodied. I'd love to hear two things. One, what does embodiment mean to you and from your perspective? And what are the ramifications if we go through life and we're not embodied?
Well, I think if we're going through life and we're not embodied, we're not feeling that emotion in our body. So, embodiment to me is connected to emotion. Um, when we're feeling ill, we have the flu, we're not buoyant, we're not energetic, our body, it shows up in the body. We express that. So embodiment is like this tangible expression, this visible expression of what's going on inside of the body. It's how we like inhabit our body. And so I see it also closely connected to emotion. And emotion is energy that is moving in and through and out of our body. So embodiment is really that, you know we are literally manifesting that position, that presentation of our current experience. So if we're not confident, each person again has their own signature. So you can see in a person if they're making a certain movement or conveying lack of confidence or conveying um, insecurity or conveying happiness or joy. You can really see it in a person because it's coming out of them. So embodiment is really that which is in your body, your emotion, your essence, your, you know, way of being in your body and in the world.
Mm, mm. How has being in touch with your body changed your life?
Hmm. Um, wow, pretty profoundly. So, I grew up in an environment that was strict, religious. Um, it was a pastor's home, and you just didn't do certain things. So activities like dancing and you know expressing certain things just was kind of taboo. Like, oh, tone it down. We don't do that. And we don't go to dances and so forth. So a lot of activities that are just like normal reactions to you know situations was kind of like, hey, no, we need to keep in check. We need to really, we're the pastor's family, so got to watch it. So those were the kind of messages that I was getting, and there has to be structure and certain, healthy guidelines in our life and everything. But, I understand where that was coming from now, understanding my parents' experience a little bit more. My mom was a little bit more rigid. My I say that my father is the most grounded person I know because he's like he didn't have shoes until he was 13, and like he's like I didn't know that that was something I needed. I was just out walking around doing my thing, and he was earthing all his life. And I'm like, no wonder you're so grounded, and no wonder you're so well adjusted and so resilient. But I found those restrictions constricting
Mm,
and created a response in me of distrust and distrust of myself and how if I didn't have permission to do certain things, then I guess I just better, I'm just not sure what I can do. And so here I was, very creative young person. I was singer and in speech and drama and, you know, okay, how am I supposed to be me without those things that I embody that live in me that
mm,
and to come out. And I it was just really hard to be told, oh well, you can have those dreams and you can do those certain things, but only if they're in this context of, church, or, if you're not doing it for God, then it's not worth anything. So again, a lot of different messages, which kind of just started shutting me down. And so my responses to things were like, "Oh, I can't. Let me check. I can't really do that. Or if I do that, how am I going to get away with it?" Always in this form of constriction emotionally, and you know, in my body as well. Um, so that kind of set me up um, for. I mean, I had um, a personal experience with sexual abuse, and that was something that, again, I didn't understand all that was happening. But later on, coming into marriage and coming into, more into adulthood, growing more and more into adulthood, getting married, having children, and realizing now, even just recently in the last, 10 years, learning about trauma, getting all the flashbacks and realizing, oh, that restriction caused a lot of areas just kind of shut down and then self protect in ways that I had to find different ways to express myself. And so recently, studying about trauma and taking a course in somatic groundwork, I'm going to really fast forward. I was able to have this experience of release when I had major surgery last summer. And so I'm trying to be personal, but not too, I don't want to, yeah, make anyone uncomfortable, but I'm just going to be vulnerable and say it. I had a hysterectomy and it was needed. And in the hospital, I had this experience of all the experience that I felt constricted me were all held in that region of my body, the pelvic area. How you move, how your lower body, your trunk moves you through the world, all that stiffness and constriction and shame was releasing. And I had a moment there in the hospital where I wanted to be healed so deeply. I needed I needed there to be meaning in this last surgery that I was going to have and this last impact because I had my children through C-section.
Mm.
I had kind of a traumatic birth experiences. So again, a lot was held in that space. So learning about trauma and how it impacts the body, learning about movement, how it is medicine to the body, how it is a release. And I didn't really know all these things, but in intuitively, I did know. And it was just at that hospital room, the convergence of this knowledge that and this intuition that came together and said, here's it's happening. The healing is happening. And I literally I could see my organs kind of floating up and out of me. And I had gratitude
Mm.
and I was receiving healing because I asked for it. And for once, like I knew the deeper meaning of having permission, having permission to have pain, carry pain in the body, ask for what I want so deeply so that I can become more whole in my body and in my mind and in my soul. And so I asked for it and I received it. And my body has not been the same ever since. My relationship to my body, to myself, to my soma, this vessel, this that I was born with, finally had that ultimate permission to ask for what I wanted and receive what I needed and get that glimpse of not perfection, but of healing. This is what healing feels like. It's active, it's infinitive. It means healing is ongoing forever if you really want it. And so that's the experience that I had. So this has impacted my life and my body because I am a different person now inside the body. My body's changing. I'm getting older, but I look at myself now. I just had a birthday today, and I'm like, this has been the best birthday in a really long time because I am happy to be where I am because I'm still becoming what I'm meant to be. So I hope that answers the question
Mm.
of that deep impact that embodiment has meant to me and movement.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That was really lovely. There's there were many powerful things about what you just shared, but something that really jumped out at me is this idea of permission.
Mm, mhm,
And that something else you said earlier about taking up space.
mhm,
You know, so often we go through life and we don't claim our space
mhm,
and we don't. for whatever reason, and we don't give ourselves permission to have that. We don't think we deserve it, or we don't think we should, or we prioritize others, whatever it is. And that
Mhm.
beautiful connection to the knowledge that's inside of our bodies that we forget exists. It's almost like there's a whole set of information that we close ourselves off to
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
our body just becomes this. Mark Walsh calls it your brain taxi, the thing that carries the part of us around that we value. And a lot of folks value their mind and their spirit, and that's beautiful. But there's this other part of us too.
Mhm.
And you describe that so beautifully. When you're working with your clients, what are some of the ways that you help them create that permission for themselves or tap into that innate knowledge that's held inside their cells, inside their tissues? What are some of the ways that you help people through that, make that connection?
No, I just really I kind of use their own words on them. For instance, um, with a client that I have, she was saying, "Well, I know how to do that, but when I come down onto my hands," she was describing something that we were doing in yoga, like coming down to plank and then cobra, coming up, and so she was saying, I know I can do that, but when I do this, she was keying in on not what she can do fully and trusting her movement, but she was trusting in her self-critique
Mm,
for me to almost fix something that she's doing wrong. And so I asked her to do it again. Show me again. How do you want to be doing that movement? How do you want it to flow more? She says, yes, yes, I want it to flow more. So she tried it again, and I let her complete that. And I told her, I'm going to be observing you and watching you. And then she came down and we ended in child's pose. I told her to rest and take a moment there. And, and then I had her look at me and I said, your movement is very strong. And when you do, so I'm repeating, when you do that, when you come down, lower your chest to the ground and come up, you are very graceful in your movement. And you need to trust that. Trust that you know that your body knows where to go without me telling you telling it where to go.
mm,
Trust that your body knows where to go. And I tell them, look where you're going and go where you're looking. And so trust your energy flow. I told her, you have very graceful movement. So luxuriate in that graceful movement. Do not let yourself hold you back because you feel you're doing one little thing wrong. So she looked at me and we just had a moment, and we're doing this on Zoom now, right? So it's
mm,
just, you kind of, I want to make sure that we're making eye contact, and as best we can. And so that she hears that I'm really saying that. And I tell her, I want your movement to be imbued with that grace. And I asked, do you feel that? And then there's a little giggle. And then I'm like, aha, it's there. You did feel that grace. You did feel beautiful when
mm.
you were in that movement. And so I get the nodding of the head. So I I'm really actively listening, but reflecting back to them what they desire. And then teaching them that they're embodying that. And practice your body, practice your signature, how you do that, how you do, cat cow, or how you do, uh, cobra or whatever. So, I hope that makes sense. It's just I'm listening in between, in the spaces in between, right?
Mhm.
There's more being there's more in the spaces in between than just what's there, what they're saying. And then I translate into that. Where are the spaces in between in your body? Where's the space in between you doing it and you believing it?
Mhm.
And then, now let's do it. Let me see how you're moving. So I like to work with that, because then we're not just working on the body. I'm not here to just work on the body, but them to really discover their own movement, their body, and then really have that empowerment. And then down the road, I start hearing them saying, I'm feeling this. This feels really good. I feel really strong. And I have them keep a journal. And I say, I want you to write words down after I'm gone. I want you to write words down, words that pop into your mind later on in the day when you're thinking about, your session, if you're sore or something. So whatever kind of modality I'm doing with some, if we're working on feet, if we're working um, on energy or whatever, I ask, use that journal to write those words down so that you can see what's coming out of you, so that you can see and trust your good heart, your trust in what you desire, not trust in that self-critic
Mm.
that is, always there,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I So yes, we're practicing a yoga or whatever we're doing, but it's what they're saying to me while they're doing movement is what the real issues are.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
those right, the issues are in the tissues. Whatever they're really working out, they're working something out of their psyche. They're working something out of their body, you know. So I mean, why do we run? Why do we meditate? We're practicing calming and stilling so that we can hear and then clear out the stuff that is negative, so we can hear really the beauty that's inside that. And we are so prone to the negative narrative,
Mm.
you know
What
so
what do, what do you think is the relationship, or is there a relationship, do you think, between that negative narrative and pain, physical
I
pain?
yeah, well, I think it has to do with trauma, you know whatever that may be. And you know trauma is not this one event. It's a series of responses and reactions to what has happened to us, you know um and having just too much too soon, too intense come in, right? That's a trauma. Like right now we're kind of in this collective trauma of, we've had a pause button, put on our life, you know, and we are now in a place of adapting to doing things in new patterns, and trying to find ways to soothe and regulate ourselves while keeping our structure, our routines, so that we're feeling kind of normal. We're doing creative things, we're doing physical things. Um, we're baking, we're eating, but
Mhm.
I think just it's trauma and really informs how the pain will manifest, because pain is pain and it will manifest, you know, but pain is a productive part of the process. We learn resilience from being and going through pain.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an interesting thing that would happen in clinic. So when I was studying Chinese medicine, part of what we needed to do, there was book study and things like that. We would have clinic hours that we would need to log, and there would be a licensed practitioner in the room with us doing acupuncture, prescribing herbs, and we would be there to observe, and we would practice needling and all of these things that you might expect in a medical school. And often people would have very profound and deep emotional reactions to
Mm.
certain places being needled, or they would have memories that would come back to them, things, and it was just so apparent that we store things in our tissues, we store things in our bodies, and when we don't process them, our body takes that burden on, and there's something really profound and powerful you said about trauma in that way. And it's not a one time point in
Mhm.
time, it's and it's such a broad way to describe the different events that we encounter in our lives and how we process them or don't. But no matter
Mhm.
what, we're experiencing them, and
Yeah.
those experiences manifest mentally in the constructs that we create, and physically in the way our tissues react. We're both reading My Grandmother's Hands right now by Resma Menakem. And one of the things
Mhm.
he talks about in there, and one of the things that I've been looking at a lot lately, is epigenetics
Mhm.
and the impact that experiences have on our DNA, and how that literally affects our cells, and when you're pregnant, how that affects the child that you're growing. Men are constantly creating
Mhm.
reproductive cells. Women are born with all of ours, right? That doesn't mean they don't morph or manipulate over time, but we're literally impacting our reproductive organs and our reproductive cells through the experience that we're having, and how that manifests in
Mhm.
our next generation, and how that gets passed on, and the genes that we passed on to the next generation hold those remnants.
Mhm.
And that's something that's really been blowing my mind lately, to think about and really be with and process, especially like you said about this particular time
Mhm.
being such I don't even know how to describe it. Like, there's just so much going on in the world on so many different levels and so many different ways. And other than maybe world wars that have happened in the past, I don't know that there has been this sort of globalized level of trauma that has permeated every culture across the
Mhm.
globe at the same time. There was something you said about resilience,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
the emerging definition of that. I'd love to hear more about what resilience means to you, and how that perspective has evolved over time.
Well, reading in My Grandmother's Hands, he talks about resilience in a framework of hope. And that's what really stood out to me, is that resilience is a flow. It's not, oh, I'm just bouncing back from this illness. Oh, I'm just bouncing back from this trauma. You don't bounce back, okay? And I mean, I guess you can, like, things, they can bounce back to an original form, but in this lens, I don't want to bounce back to what was. I want to bounce into a newer, more expanded shape, right? And the how I see that happening is like resilience pushing through and morphing its way into the future generations, and creating this strong tower, this strength of that hope is just not this Pollyanna, oh, I'm just hopeful, but that there's a strength that is that underlying current of resilience and desire, and the deep desire to thrive in such a purposeful way. And thinking about ancestry and how my parents were resilient. Now I understand how they carried out their parenting and what their frame of reference was, and moving through into mine, into my responsibilities as the matriarch of my family. I'm excited because the resilience, I'm flowing into that. It's flowing into me. It's this beautiful flow of there's more to come. There's a ebbing and a flowing, but it's moving. And I love that, again, it's grounded in this hope that things look bleak now, but we have the ability to change outcomes. Epigenetics, right? Things go back 12 to 14 generations. Okay. And I keep thinking about, like, hey, where am I in that? Where is my oldest daughter in that process? And you know, I'm thinking about what's in what am I passing on and what's going to pass through. So what kind of, trauma is going to pass through. And I've been working and very committed personally to changing, that generational change. And that means changing language. And that means saying to my children, who are adult children now, you have permission to change your mind and do whatever you want to do in life. You have permission to seek out different skills that you have and just fulfill all that is in you. You have permission, you know and that's also building resilience. Oh, I can change permission. I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to move
Mhm.
through life with this underpinning of fearfulness that, oh, somebody might not accept that. Forget that. Move through. Move through, knowing that I'm passing on to you resilience, a flow of hope, a flow of hope that goes on past me. It goes on into you. I have two daughters and a son, so, and they're having children, and I keep saying, give them permission to be who they are. Always give permission,
Mm.
you know, and that has been so freeing. And especially reading this book, realizing, wow, I'm experiencing the gifts of what intuition kind of gives you, that innate knowing of things, but then to read pages, right, in books that echo that deep feeling that there's a little seed inside going, I know this, but where can I share it and when? And who can I share it with? And you know, you have permission to share it now. Be it now. So that's, I guess, I just have a new appreciation for that word. It's just changed my perspective. And I think this time that we're in now, our paradigms are shifting. We're in the, it feels like we're in the upside down,
The bizarro world. Mhm.
right?
Yep.
But somehow we humans, we thrive and we adapt, and we move on, and we, take this time to create something new, some new kind of resilience and a hope. So I hope that made sense. But that's what it means to me. Just
Yeah.
this flow of hope.
Mm. What is it that you wanna create during this time?
Good question. I kind of feel like I'm creating it now. I this sounds really crazy, but you know how there's times in your day where you're like, can you just stop the world right now, please? I just need a moment, and now we got that moment. Okay.
Mhm. Careful what you ask
So,
for. Mhm.
you um, and secretly, I'm one of those people who are like, I kind of don't mind that I don't have to go anywhere. Like, I don't have to go to that party. I mean, things can kind of get simplified a little bit, and it kind of feels good. So you know, creating, just having freedom to explore things and take my time exploring things. And I guess I want to create a, I want to create a space in and around me that attracts curiosity, because the more I learn, I realize my passion is greater than my knowledge. And, so I want to have the knowledge, and I want to really chew on it and drink it and know it. And so that when I'm ready to share it, that it's the right dose, or for the right time, the right timing. But I want to create a, like, energy field of curiosity, that people wouldn't let this time squelch life. There is much death and sadness and anxiety and anger and tumult and disparities and anguish. It's very profound. But I think that life pushes on, and we can create and stay curious and be available to that. I want to create that kind of field in and around me.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. It's really beautiful. You mentioned language earlier, and that's something I always appreciate about you, Rebecca. Every time I hear you speak, is the words you choose carry such beautiful significance and meaning. And there's a real poetry in the way you speak and the pictures you paint. And when you were talking about working with your clients and
Mhm.
reflecting back to them what you see, that's such a beautiful part of, that's our job as coaches, right? Is to reflect back to someone what they might not be seeing in themselves.
Mhm.
And there's something so intriguing to me about how that shows up in our bodies in a way that we might not even realize it. Our bodies give us away. You can go on YouTube and see all sorts of people who like to go on there and analyze apology videos. And like, this is what they do. They go in there and they look at somebody's video and go, oh, see what they did there and what they did there. It's kind of fun to watch. The inner criminal scientist in me is like, oh, that's kind of cool. And at the same time, we're doing that all the time.
Mhm.
Our body has tells and gives us away. And there's something really beautiful about being able to reflect that back to someone and help them see something about themselves that they may not be seeing otherwise.
Mhm. As you were saying that, 2 words popped up in me, is judgment. Going back to that negative narrative, we are so in the practice of judgment. I recently read the book by Shauna Shapiro, Good Morning, I Love You. It's a beautiful
Beautiful.
book on meditation. And, one of the things she says in there is, what you practice grows stronger. And I thought, wow, yeah. And she tells a story that when she went to the ashram, she was getting up, at the crack of dawn and doing, I'm going to go meditate. I'm going to go there. I'm going to get there. And, she'd wake up late or whatever, and she would show up, and then she was all kind of in a huff. And then she asked, the guru, well, why, what is up? How come I'm not, you know, fulfilling what I'm supposed to be doing? And he said, well, you're not practicing mindfulness. You're practicing frustration and judgment
Mm.
and hurry. And, you know, and I thought, yes, right? We practice, that's so easy. And we don't trust our good self. Somehow our not so good self wins out all the time, right? Because that judgment, that judge is there. And then we tend to do that to people. And I feel like that has been done to me all my life. For half my life, I felt judged and singled out and not allowed, you know. And so coming into the second half of my life, I feel like I've been reborn, like, wow, I get to do fun stuff and really believe that this is part of me and not just some performance aspect, doing all the right things. So, and when you go through trauma, whatever kind of trauma it may be, there's you know, this little insidious thing about trust. Oh, you can trust me. You're safe with me. And then things turn on a dime and then you're in a bad place. So I personally have had to work on trust and judgment, discerning but I've had to trust my good heart again. I've had to trust that it is good and that I can make safe decisions and that I can come to a place where I choose not to judge. I choose to ask, what happened to that person? What has happened? Tell me, help me understand how you suffer. And that's kind of the approach I want to take with clients. Help me understand how you suffer. And I can see in your body where you suffer. And there's a story behind that suffering. Our shape, our dwelling, our shape holds those stories. And so my approach is to how can we find that new shape? How can we change the shape, shift the shape from distrust, judgment, negative narrative to trusting yourself, trusting your heart, and
Mm,
trusting your choices.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah. Mm. So much in there. I'm just unpacking mentally all the luscious goodness and so much of what you shared. Um, as you were talking, it reminds me of a wonderful book called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Yes.
And the first agreement about being impeccable with your word.
Mm,
And
mhm.
he talks about that in the context of the words that we share about others and how we use those words about others. Things like not gossiping and not, talking negative about people and things like that. But there's also an element of that that's about how we talk about ourselves and the judgment we place on
Mm,
ourselves and how that shows up for us and how powerful it is to look at, again, our bodies give us away, how we've internalized those messages and how those have driven how we hold ourselves, how we walk across a room, how
mhm.
we breathe.
Yeah. Mhm.
A lot of times we think about it's how we look, and sure, that might be a part of it, but it's so much more than that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yes. The body keeps the score.
Mm,
Yeah. Another good book by Bessel van der Kolk that really opened my world. And that's where I got that word "emover" because he mentions that in his book. And I looked it up, I'm like, okay, what's the root of this word and where does it come from? And, basically it's Latin for, emotion, in motion. And what, I mean, like you just said, your body gives you away. You can tell if you're happy, elated, mad, angry. You you can just see it in another person. And we're wired that way. Our energy is moving some kind of emotion around. Or if we're not moving, if we're very static and still, how do you come out of that? So as a person who's a trainer, I I like to observe people and I'll see somebody walking and they've got a limp or something and I'm like, "Oh, I just wanna go work on that person." You know? Or just if he just did this, he could try to alleviate that. And so, it's like I'm in this habit of looking at people and in their bodies and how they're just walking, and I think of, wonder what's happening in that person, because I can see an affect, of some kind. Um, so yeah, it's definitely just oozes out of us, this emotional energy, and I think that's what so many people are in search of just finding a place to land safely with that energy, you know, and then be able to release it out. We just don't know how to slow down, and it's very intimidating to be in that stillness and quiet when you're not safe, when you don't feel safe if you're being vulnerable.
Mm.
Nobody wants to feel exposed, but you know people want to be touched and loved, and people need that reassurance. We were literally made that way with skin, and that's something that I have found powerful also in my practice, is just touching someone very gently. I've had clients where I've just, I ask them permission to touch them, and you know I knew early on something is up with this, because I'm not just doing training. I'm not just doing, yoga. I'm not just doing the stretching or whatever. But, you know, part of my intuitiveness is I would just place my hand on their neck or shoulder or just on top of their hand. And this emotion would just ooze out of this person. And I knew then that, oh, this is part of the healing. We need that connection, and maybe this person has not ever had a tenderness expressed to them. So that's been a very powerful way of just being with someone. um, and I think that also comes from my desire, as I've come again in that active healing. That healing is infinitive. It just never stops. If we think it stops and one and done, that's not it. But we continue to heal as we create that container, that field, and ask, can I touch you? Is that okay? And I think we're all really, craving that, especially now. This is very hard for humans to not touch or see each other in the flesh. And yet here we are, you and I connecting, and I feel very, I mean, from the minute I met you, I feel there's a knowing there. You have a field of curiosity. Like I'm like, zzz. And but it's not a bug light, but it's this, this field that is there that's feels real to me. But and I think that is our part as healers, to help someone feel feel it, move in it, and heal from it. And from that place, this empowerment that comes. And mine is different than yours, but everyone, you feel that confidence, that assuredness that I'm loved and I'm here, and there's a purpose, you know?
Mm.
So that touch aspect is profound.
Made me think of the story you so generously shared earlier about your own experience of stepping into your own healing. And as you were sharing that about just the simple feeling of another human making contact with you, and the permission that I'm imagining that unlocks with someone to be in their body in that moment, you're feeling that connection, that touch, So it immediately puts you in your body because you're sensing that sensation. And then that intuitive sense, I'm sure that they get because you exude this just naturally, which is this healing, generous presence, and the space that you create for people to just be and allow themselves to just, I can just see and imagine people just
Mhm.
like, yes, someone sees me, and in a very deep and profound way that's connected to their body.
Mhm.
That touch, so deeply profound. And I think about generations, and something you said earlier about ancestors, and
Mhm.
thinking about who you want to be as the matriarch of your family, and what you're passing on to your children, and what you're encouraging them to pass on, that they'll pass on to their generations. And I think back to, previous generations who grew up in, at least in the US, in a culture where touch wasn't something that was practiced regularly.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'll talk to folks and their grandparents, and sometimes their parents didn't really hug them a lot as a child or anything like that. And how that shapes the way we view the world, and the way we view ourselves, and the way we view each other.
Mhm. Yes, that is so true. Because especially reading that book, it brings questions up, and I think, gosh, what do I remember the most from being little, like a toddler and uh, kindergartner and stuff? Growing up, I remember being spanked harshly. And dismissed, and and I thought, well, when I spank my kids, which I did, like, we're gonna do, back then in the 90s with like parenting with love and logic, we're gonna have a conversation, which we did. I'm like, okay, this is hard work. This is uncomfortable, but yes, that touch that I received was kind of harsh and you know, not it didn't seem loving, but to them they thought they were doing the right thing, and I understand that because I do understand now from stories how they came up and um how they were touched, harshly. And um and it makes me sad, but I also understand a little bit better now. And yet I can change that. I was able to practice the changing of that. And even now, watching and helping raise my grandson, yes, there are so many other ways that we can communicate that we need to redirect, and that something was inappropriate. Um, so it's really interesting how nuanced these things are, but it is possible if we pay attention and stay present to what's happening within us, so that we can give out the correct redirection and discipline. you know
Mhm.
So, and there's a lot of hugging going on here with him, and kissing, and he's just so fun. And one thing I wanted to say on this light note, we talked about taking up space.
Mhm.
Um, and so this morning, we're having breakfast and stuff, and my grandson he's 3.5. He'll be 4 in January. He's taking all the little cars and toys and out of the big toy basket that we have in the living room. He's just throwing them like, past the boundary that I think should be thrown. So he's throwing them and they're like going under the table, and I'm like, hey, be careful with that. And so here he was, just throwing stuff out, not trying to be bad or anything like that. And I found myself saying, oh, yeah, we need to keep them right here on this part of the carpet. you know and so as we were talking about taking up space, I'm like, he's just finding out how it feels to take up space and to have stuff. What happens when I take up space? What happens when I throw my toys? Okay, it's not going to break anything. And I just thought back to that, going, wow, I was being I was being annoyed. So then I was reining him in, thinking, yeah, that's what I grew up with. It's like, here we go, another example. But I'm like, oh yeah, well, I guess it's not hurting anything. So there was a lot of toys like in every corner of that room. But at the end of breakfast, we played a game and picked up toys, you know, and there was no going further with trying to tell him to not do that. So redirected that. But I caught when we were talking about that, thinking, I did what I'm just talking about right now. I did that this morning. So, um, but see, it's good to be able to catch that and just be aware, be aware of that. Um, it's okay, and little kids need to take up space, and they do.
And they do. It's funny you share that story. Thank you for sharing that. I have a 2-year-old, and she loves to chuck stuff around, and partly I get a sense that it's to see what happens to it. And sometimes she'll do it and she'll look at me like, is this okay? Is this not okay? And so in that moment, I catch myself, in my own head going, is this okay? Is this not okay?
Mhm.
How do I respond in that moment? And is she doing anything bad? Is she not? So it's really it's funny. Because yeah, I watch her making decisions about the world and coming to conclusions about how she needs to be loved or accepted, or all these, that's the time in our lives when we make up all those stories and all those
Mhm.
decisions that we spend the rest of our life proving and protecting.
Yeah, I love that. Yes.
So it's fascinating to watch. That I'd love to hear from your perspective as a movement coach, as someone who works with people on movement and healing, as parents. So for myself selfishly, and other parents that are out there, what are some things that we can be doing to help encourage our children to be more in touch with their bodies, to grow up with that permission like you mentioned earlier, that really serves them throughout their life? What can we be doing or thinking about, do you think?
Um, I just believe that kids, at such a young age, they're just so adaptive and so open to learning. And something that um, we've done is really um, it. How do I word this? So my grandson is deaf. He was born deaf, and he has had cochlear implant surgery. So he has two cochlear implants. He hears excellently when he's wearing them, and when he has them off, he's deaf. But we didn't know he was deaf until 3 months in. So we started doing like sign language, and just we're thinking, okay, we need to communicate. And what's so interesting is that a child that doesn't have a sense, like he didn't have his hearing, he was so keyed into us visually. And we were like, oh, no wonder he can track us and he knows when we're in and out of the room. And again, we didn't know that he was deaf. And so now learning about embodiment, I realized, learning sign language it's an embodied language, you
Mhm.
know? Thank you. Yes. Stop. You're using your body to literally communicate. And so that's been a beautiful exercise in slowing down, because when you're speaking, when you're doing sign language, you have to look at the person. You can't be looking in your phone and having a conversation with a person in the deaf community, you
Mhm.
know, or
Mm.
my grandson. I have to look at him when he doesn't have his ears on, so that he knows what I am asking, or so we can have a conversation. So he's adapted beautifully with or without hearing. He is fully himself. But there have been times where we learned that he cannot communicate. Maybe it might be painful. He may have a headache. He might have hearing fatigue. And so he's had these really extreme crying bouts, and just which is normal. I mean, I would do the same thing probably. But one thing that he's keyed into with us, and my husband is really good. He's like the grandson whisperer. He can just hold him and allows him to just be in that space. And then he says to him, breathe with me. And so
Mhm.
they've made this thing of 1, 2, 3, 4, and so he's, counting. But again, it's just this simple stopping, simply stopping, just simply stopping. And you might have to sit there for 20 minutes while the child is having this moment. But can we simply stop and know where we are and be that that safety pole, that we're the safe person? And can we sustain being simply there while this tantrum or whatever this crying bout is happening? It's a release of emotion. Observe. And it's not this, it doesn't have to be this battle. And not everybody is good at that, but breathing will immediately calm your nervous system. Breathing is the most profound, really, tool that is built into our bodies. Seeing and breathing, you know, Canaan can't hear sometimes when he doesn't have his ears on, but he is so keyed in and he's watching our bodies and he can respond and react to our body and our facial expressions. So I think what I would answer that question is simply stop. When everything within you wants to scream, run, rage, you know, get away from what's happening. And it's if we practice, and that's why it's called practice. Practice is not about perfection for this one-time performance. Practice is permanent. Practice embeds itself into our DNA on a cellular level. When we breathe, we access the universe. When we breathe, we are everything. We are in everything. I mean, I know that sounds kind of out there, but we are in the place where we need to be, where we're right there in the breath. Just breathe. It changes your state of mind. Changes your emotional state. And then the frontal cortex can function again. So that's really hard. And I know that it's hard because I've watched my daughter experience postpartum depression, which I had that too back in the 80s. Nobody called it that.
Mm.
I joke with my daughters. I'm like, look, I had Oprah and Phil Donahue, okay? And when they came on, I could laugh, I could cry. I felt like I had some kind of connection. But I was dealing with that by myself. There was not talk about that. And I've watched my daughter run out of the house in complete undoneness because, her son is crying or something. I mean, that has alleviated a lot and a lot of work is being done. But I've seen the very uncomfortable side when we can't regulate, when we just we literally flip our lid, our emotions just go offline. We're offline. And so breathing can bring you back to the present moment. Breathing brings you back into your body, into your brain. But it is not our normal culture to just stop. And, we can stop. I mean, literally, wherever we are, we can just take a breath and that slows things down. So that's that's my first go-to.
Mm.
And so
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And what a beautiful thing to model for your child. I love hearing that your husband, let's practice breathing.
yes.
What a beautiful skill to learn at such a young age. I think so much reflecting back, I feel like I've learned throughout my life, hopefully, but especially I feel like it's been exponential in these last maybe 10ish years, let's say, and especially in the last 4 or 5. And often I'll reflect back and go, how would my life have been different if I had known now at 15 or 20, what I know now.
Mhm.
And who knows, right? I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. So I'm happy in that. There's a part of me that loves the idea of passing on these tools to
Mhm.
folks in their youth to have for their whole life. Which
Mhm.
which leads me to my last question for you today, Rebecca. You've been so generous. Thank you. Um, we've talked about children and having children, being parents, and as I mentioned, my daughter is 2 right now at this point in time. And as I do these podcasts, there's an element of these that I would love to have for her, if you will.
Mm.
And so my last question for you is, reflecting back on your life, everything that you've learned, everything that you've experienced, what would you say to your 2-year-old self,
Mm. Mm.
knowing everything you know now? What would you say to yourself at 2?
Okay, I'm going to say the first thing that popped into my mind. You're going to make me cry.
Mm.
Do not fear. Do not fear. Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing, for being here, for sharing your journey and your insights and your beautiful heart.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. If, if
Oh,
if people want to connect with you, where's a good place for them to go to connect with you and learn more about you?
um, Facebook is where I'm at. You can look up Rebecca Berciunas. And then I have a Train for Life page. So it's basically facebook.com/TFL for Train for Life. So it's TFL Rebecca. So but if you just type my name, Rebecca Berciunas, you'll find the 2 pages. So pretty simple. So
Awesome. And I'll include that link as well in the description. So thank you for
anybody
that.
anybody can email me as well if they're interested in connecting in that way as well. So I'm working on other stuff. So, but I wanted to share a quote that I heard that was really I found very profound to me this week. It's a Mark Twain quote, and it says. Which is very appropriate since my birthday was this week. The 2 most important days of your life are the day that you are born and the day you find out why.
Mm,
And yeah, it made me think, have I come to that day where I found out why? And sometimes I do because I feel that being a source, a resource to people, a place of healing and faith and hope is what my purpose is about, you
mm,
know? And thank you for helping me on that journey, because clarity was something that popped up after, when you asked about that early on in this conversation, and vulnerability. Um, and that's kind of putting yourself out there, and, you know, do not fear is something that I can be with now. I I I don't fear that vulnerability. It doesn't if I'm not practicing judgment, then I'm not worrying about being judged. So, practice trust.
Mm,
So, thank you very much for being now a part of my life.
mhm,
So, yes.
mhm. Thank you.
Until we meet in person, which that day will come.
Yes, it will. And as always, thank you for listening. And if you'd like to connect with me or learn more about me, you can go to tracyloring.com. Love for you to leave a review. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment and let me know what you loved, what you'd love to see more of. And if you know of someone that you think would be a great fit for this podcast, I'd love to hear from them. Thank you again, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. Hmm.